Have you ever paused in a moment of silence and felt that someone who once stood beside you is still near? Not in a way that can be touched or heard, but something subtler. A sudden memory that emerges without cause. A breeze that carries a familiar scent, or a thought that doesn't quite feel like your own. Are these simply tricks of a mind coping with loss? Or are they signs that something or someone is still reaching through? This question has haunted human beings across time, cultures, and belief systems. It's not just about death. It's about what it means to be alive, what it means to love, and what it means to continue even when the form has faded. Today we're going to explore that deep and often unspoken question: do the dead watch the living? But more than that, what does this connection between worlds tell us about the nature of consciousness, memory, and the invisible threads that bind us across time? Before we begin, remember to subscribe to Mental Dose and join our community where we don't shy away from life's biggest questions. Now let's step into the unknown together. Signs that the bond persists. From the deserts of ancient civilizations to the crowded streets of modern cities, one truth seems constant: human beings have never believed death to be the final word. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets tell us of rituals that invited the dead to partake in meals with the living. In the Andes, indigenous families still leave places at the table during certain festivals, convinced that their ancestors sit among them. In Japanese Obon traditions, lanterns are floated down rivers to guide spirits home and back again. These aren't merely symbolic acts, they reflect a worldview in which death is not severance but transition. Even today, in a world driven by science and skeptical reason, people report uncanny moments: phones ringing at the hour of a loved one's passing, dreams so vivid they linger into the day, or unexplainable peace in places marked by intense loss. For every theory that labels these experiences as psychological coping, there's a deeper human intuition pushing back. What if we're not alone? These events tend to emerge during birth, death, crisis, and transformation threshold moments when the walls of ordinary life seem to thin. Why? Because the soul, if it exists at all, might not be subject to our rules of time and space. The architecture of the invisible. Let's step away from culture and look at the personal. How many people have you known who speak of a presence beside them after someone dies? Not in ghost stories or haunted tales, but in quiet, tender moments, the sense that a hand rests on the shoulder during grief, or that someone helped guide a decision from beyond. If you listen carefully, people rarely describe these experiences as terrifying. They use words like comforting, unexpected, familiar. There's a softness to the unseen, a texture that doesn't feel like imagination gone wild, but rather like something old, something remembered. And perhaps memory itself is the key. What if memory is more than storage? What if it's a medium, a bridge through which something or someone can still travel? In most traditions, the dead are not far. They are just unseen. Many philosophies teach that reality is layered. What we perceive is but one frequency on a broader spectrum of existence. Just as radio waves exist all around us, yet require a receiver to bring them into awareness, perhaps the presence of the departed is always near, and only certain states, grief, love, openness, allow us to tune in. Consciousness beyond the body. Here's where the conversation becomes both mystical and scientific. Because the old idea that consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain is beginning to crack under pressure. In recent decades, researchers in near-death experiences, terminal lucidity, and after-death communication have documented cases where people report detailed visions, verifiable events, and profound insights, all during moments when the brain was supposedly inactive. How does a dying woman know what her brother said in another room? How does a man clinically dead for minutes return with information about a stranger's accident that occurred during his flatline? Some physicists point to quantum entanglement as a metaphor: two particles that, once connected, remain mysteriously linked across space and time. Could human relationships, deeply emotional and energetically bound, behave in a similar way? Could grief, love, and longing act as energetic signals that draw the attention or presence of those who have passed on? If we abandon the notion that death equals disappearance, then we open to the idea that consciousness may transcend the physical, that the mind isn't housed in the brain, but the brain is more like a lens through which mind expresses itself. And if that's true, then it's not unreasonable to think that minds once connected could remain in subtle contact. Why they might still be near. The dead don't appear in mundane moments. You don't feel them in traffic or grocery aisles. They appear when you break, when your soul fractures under the weight of loss, or when you face a turning point, a choice, a rebirth. That's the pattern across thousands of personal accounts. Presence in the aftermath. Guidance in the grief. Signals in silence. But if we're being honest, these stories aren't really about death. They're about love. Because love doesn't care about boundaries. It doesn't dissolve with time. It's not erased by a funeral. In many spiritual views, love is the vibrational echo that carries a soul through lifetimes, and the reason contact is even possible. It's not about watching, like an audience. It's about feeling, like a frequency, and the more intense the emotion, the deeper the bond, the clearer the signal. We may not be able to prove it in a lab, but we feel it in the marrow of our being, that those we've loved and lost are not completely gone. They are closer in moments of pain, near in moments of joy, and present in moments of choice. Modern science meets ancient knowing. In labs and hospitals, some researchers are now daring to say the quiet part out loud, that something survives death. Or, at the very least, that our current understanding of death is incomplete. Theories like non-local consciousness suggest that the brain doesn't create awareness. It receives it, like a satellite dish tuning into a field that exists beyond the body. If that's true, then the idea of the deceased reaching us isn't fantasy. It's physics we don't yet understand. We already accept that Wi-Fi carries invisible signals, that phones can detect voice and data across continents. Is it so strange to think that consciousness, whatever it is, might be far more fluid than we thought? What if those ancient rituals weren't superstition, but technology of the heart? What if grief isn't just sorrow, but a channel? What if our love doesn't just mourn, it calls, living in the light of their gaze? So let's return to the question, do the dead watch the living? Perhaps it's the wrong question. Perhaps it's not about surveillance, but presence. Not about watching, but witnessing. When we grieve, when we grow, when we make choices born of transformation, maybe that's when we are most felt on both sides of the veil. In this light, how we live becomes a message. Every time we rise from despair, choose healing, forgive, or become who we were meant to be, we may be honoring not just ourselves, but the unseen witnesses who loved us. And maybe, just maybe, their quiet presence is what gives us strength in those very moments. A window, not a wall. What we're talking about isn't fantasy, it's mystery. It's the felt experience of millions of people across every era of human history who say in one voice, they never really left. Maybe the veil between life and death isn't a wall. Maybe it's a window, a translucent curtain that moves gently when the winds of emotion blow just right. And through that window, what comes through isn't shadow or fear, but love, guidance, memory, and meaning. So if you've ever felt someone was near, if you've ever heard a whisper in the quiet, if you've ever felt seen in your most broken hour, you are not imagining things. You are remembering a truth too deep for words. Engagement and call to action. If this spoke to something inside you, take a moment to reflect. And if you're willing, share your story in the comments. You're not alone in these moments, and neither are those who've passed on. Subscribe to Mental Dose and join our Telegram channel for more explorations into consciousness, healing, and the mysteries of life and death. Let's keep asking the big questions together. But what does this mean for the living? If the ones we lost are still near, not haunting, not trapped, but quietly witnessing, then how should we live? Not in fear, not in paralysis, but perhaps with a certain reverence, a sacredness in how we speak, act, and love. Because if someone is still watching, not with eyes, but with essence, then our smallest gestures echo further than we think. Every time we choose compassion over revenge, patience over pride, or truth over comfort, we may be aligning with something beyond us, something ancestral, something eternal. This isn't about performance. It's about presence. To be aware that our lives don't happen in isolation. They unfold in the aftermath of countless stories, of lives we carry within our own. You didn't become who you are by accident. The voices that shape you, their dreams, fears, hopes, still whisper through your decisions. That guidance doesn't always need a name or a face. Sometimes it's a feeling that rises when you're about to make a mistake, a weight in your chest that tells you to wait, a peace that descends when you finally surrender. Perhaps those moments are not simply your subconscious processing data. Maybe, just maybe, someone who loved you is speaking through your intuition. The modern world doesn't leave much space for this idea. We're told to be rational, logical, skeptical. We dissect everything, trying to find the root cause, the neurological mechanism, the evolutionary purpose. But some truths exist outside the laboratory. Some experiences can't be replicated or measured, they can only be lived. When your mother's favorite song plays just as you're thinking of her, when your child says a phrase they couldn't possibly know, when you wake from a dream so vivid it feels like you are somewhere else entirely. These are not statistical anomalies. They are invitations. They ask us to expand our view of reality, not contract it. Because maybe reality is not as solid as we believe. Maybe it bends to love, to memory, to presence. Maybe what we call paranormal is simply the normal we've forgotten how to see. The world is rich with mysteries, but we've been trained to look away. We treat the spiritual like it's a story for children. But perhaps the real immaturity is our refusal to acknowledge the unseen forces that shape our lives. Imagine for a moment that your most cherished person still exists, not just in your memory, but in some conscious form. Not wandering, not waiting, but gently tethered to you by the love you shared. Not watching with judgment, but present with compassion. Not pulling strings, but holding space. How would that change the way you speak about them? How would that change the way you speak to yourself? Maybe you'd stop regretting what you didn't say. Maybe you'd start saying it now. Out loud. Not for closure, but for continuation. Maybe you'd let yourself cry without shame. Laugh without guilt. Live without the constant fear of forgetting. Because remembering is not a prison, it's a portal. A way back. A way forward. The living and the dead are not two separate worlds. They are two rooms in the same house. We pass through doors: birth, death, loss, awakening, but the walls are thin. And sometimes, in moments of stillness, we hear footsteps in the next room. Not to frighten us, just to remind us that love doesn't vanish. It moves. It adapts. It watches. It waits. What would it mean to live like that was true? It would mean slowing down, paying attention. It would mean honoring the people who shaped you, not just with flowers and photographs, but by embodying what they stood for. You become the echo of their voice, the continuation of their purpose. You carry their unfinished stories in your bones. And when you walk with dignity, when you speak with kindness, when you choose to grow, even when it hurts, you give them life again. Not literally, but meaningfully, eternally. And maybe that's the real form of immortality. Not preserved in marble or etched in stone, but lived, daily, in the quiet choices of those left behind. The dead don't need monuments. They need movement. They don't need prayers alone. They need presence. They need us to live as if they're still part of the story, because they are. Too often, grief is treated as something to get over, like a bad cold. But grief isn't a sickness. It's a transformation, a reordering of reality. You're not broken because you miss them. You're open. Open to dimensions most people rush past. Grief doesn't close the door, it opens the veil. And in that space, we begin to understand they are not missing. They are just invisible. But not always. Not entirely. Sometimes you'll feel them in a decision made quickly but wisely, in a scent that arrives for no reason, in a coincidence too precise to be random. These are not hallucinations. They are harmonies. Notes in a song too complex for the rational mind to play. But your soul knows the melody. It's played it before. We are not alone. And we never have been. Every heartbeat you carry is layered with others. Generations of love, of pain, of resilience, and joy. You are the sum of 1,000 stories, most of which you'll never hear. But you feel them in your instincts, in your cravings, in your dreams. And when someone you love dies, their part doesn't vanish, it just changes keys. And when you speak to them, even in silence, something answers. Not always in words, often in warmth, in timing, in a sudden feeling that the air has shifted. Trust that. Trust the subtle. We've been trained to dismiss the intangible, but that's where the sacred lives. Not in spectacles, but in sensations. Not in dogma, but in depth. And if the dead are near, if they are truly watching, it means you're not navigating this alone. It means the wisdom you need isn't far away. It's in you. It was planted there by every hand that held yours, every voice that soothed your fears, every soul that loved you before they left. And maybe they didn't leave. Maybe they just changed form. Let that thought carry you through the darkest nights. Let it remind you that closure isn't forgetting. It's remembering in a different way. It's building a new relationship with someone who no longer needs a body to love you. They don't need to be here to be with you. They never really needed that. You did. But now, you're learning. You're learning how to listen differently, how to feel instead of see, how to receive instead of reach. This is what it means to heal. Not to stop missing them, but to stop believing they're gone. Not to erase the pain, but to understand what it's pointing to, the depth of your love. And the truth that love, real love, doesn't end. It evolves. It waits in dreams. It lingers in laughter. It lives in legacy. You are not just the one who mourns. You are the one who carries, who channels, who continues. They watch you not to judge, but to bless. They witness not your perfection, but your persistence. They're near not because they're stuck, but because you matter. And if you've ever doubted that, look around. Look within. Feel the presence that rises when you speak their name with love. That's not memory alone. That's memory acting as a doorway. A soul doesn't disappear. It disperses. It merges. It becomes part of the field we all swim in. And when the timing is right, it brushes against you, not as a ghost, but as grace. So live fully. Love fiercely. Speak to them. Cry if you need. Laugh without guilt. And remember, always what you had was real, and what you still have is even more real. Because death is not the opposite of life. It's the opposite of birth. Life has no opposite. Life continues. And so do they.